November 8th, 2016 is a very important day for this country and our great state of California. As many of you know, this is Election Day, the day where our country votes on who the next president will be. But this isn't the only important decision American voters will be making. There are a litany of measures and other propositions that will affect our daily lives, whether we want to admit it or not. In California, one of these measures will be on Proposition 64, the measure that legalizes consumption of marijuana for adults ages 21 and up. Cannabis has been demonized by America's government since the 1930s, and since then it has been hard for America's government and society to look at the positives that are possible from the legalization of it. Today I'll be informing you of the pros of voting yes for Proposition 64, with the significant amount of tax gains for our economy, the research of cannabis as a medical alternative, and the mitigation of jail and prison overflow due to the current criminalization of cannabis. To better understand why we are making a Schedule I narcotic legal, it is probably best to look at what were the drivers in making it illegal in the first place. After prohibition ended of alcohol around the 1930s, the government recognized the flaws of alcohol prohibition with the criminals, unsafe products, and money that the underworld of bootlegging made. Once alcohol prohibition ended, Harry Anslinger, the commissioner of the Treasury Department of Narcotics, needed a new public enemy. Otherwise, he'd be out of the job and government resources. In a scramble, Anslinger decided the new target of his enforcement would be cannabis. Mr. Anslinger then wrote to 30 scientists in our country to help them make a case against pot. 29 of the 30 doctors wrote back to Anslinger and told him that they did not believe that pot was nearly as harmful as alcohol or harmful at all. But what did Mr. Anslinger do? He chose the one doctor who called the plant the demon weed. From then on, Anslinger made it his purpose in life to create a worldwide ban on cannabis, and so he did. The only holdout was our neighbor Mexico, but because they kept holding out, the United States ended trade of legal painkillers for the people at the end of their lives. Hospitals in Mexico could not take seeing their patients die in so much pain, so finally Mexico agreed to pursue its war on cannabis as well. So there you have it. It was deemed illegal for not the right purposes or public safety, which is supposed to be, but to save someone's career path and resources. Now let's get to the positives of Proposition 64 and what it would bring if voted yes upon. So the biggest one so far is the tax. California on its own is the sixth leading economy in the entire world, and if we were to add a 15% retail sale on cannabis, our state could earn several $billions additionally each year. But where would the money go, you ask? It's a good question. According to the author of the bill, revenue created from the new tax will go to two compartments, the first being covering costs of administering and enforcement of the measure. Secondly, the monies made that will be distributed by $2 million per year going to further research of medical cannabis at UCSD, $10 million per year for public California universities, $3 million per year toward researching new ways to deduct driver impairment, and its remaining balances at-risk youth children, drug education and prevention, and the blockage of illegal marijuana producers and spreading awareness of the plant's effects. Secondly, is the medical side. Cannabis and its property CBD is already currently being used by non-traditional medical professionals to help cure certain forms of cancer. With a yes vote toward Proposition 64, our universities will be able to do legitimate experiments with state funds. Also, people that use marijuana currently for medicinal purposes will no longer need to renew their cannabis card every year and pay ridiculous renewal fees from what they call so-called doctors annually. Perhaps the most endearing to me is the decriminalization aspect of the bill. As many of you might have heard, our country is coming back from one of the worst economic periods since the 1930s. And currently, taxpayers spend a whopping $39 billion annually on the prison system alone. With Proposition 64 in action, there will be less and less bias targeting by our government to minority neighborhoods in search of marijuana, which will in turn lessen the amount of people that are arrested for having small quantities. With marijuana, it is often the poor that are subjugated the most to profiling and detention, and because of their socioeconomic positioning, it is hard for them to afford an attorney or to pay the court fees. If we were made legal, many of the laws that have stagnated certain communities would soon dissipate. So as much as we needed to see the benefits, we also need to see who is supporting the measure and who is opposing it as well. On one side, and with the yes vote, you have Napster founder Sean Parker with a hefty investment, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, the LA Times, and the Democratic Party. Opponents of the measure is Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is actually a Democrat as well, Republican Senator Joel Anderson, and the California Republican Party. The side that has made the most capital so far is the yes vote with around $13 million compared to the no vote with $700,000. That's a huge divergence in cost too and pricing. So in conclusion, I wanted to make sure that I posed this speech as neutrally as possible. And from a neutral perspective, it was hard for me to ignore the fact that legalizing a naturally growing plant seems to do more good than bad when it comes to generating more income, lessening prison and jail populations, and providing possible cures for cancer. If one were to vote no, we would not have the opportunity to see if there's a cure for cancer right underneath our nose this entire time. And when a commodity becomes regulated, people know exactly what they're getting each time. Whatever you do on November 8th is up to you, but whatever you do, please vote.